It literally means to cut off a head. Now, what are we talking about when we talk about cutting off heads? We're not talking about Hilchos Shchita in this particular instance. What we're talking about is as follows. We established last time, I'm going to re-establish the facts. We established that in order to do a malacha on Shabbos, the malacha has to contain various parameters. It has to contain various conditions, let's call it. And those conditions have to be fulfilled in order for it to be considered meleches machsheves. Meleches machsheves, we said, is because Shabbos is a reflection of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who created the world in 6 days and then ceased to create on the 7th day. He stopped from creating. So we reflect that by stopping all creative activity. So the important word on Shabbos is creative, and Shabbos has so many areas of halacha which are totally different, so many conditions that are different than any other area of the Torah, of all other mitzvahs and averos, because of this very, very specific condition of creating. Now, not just that, but we know further that the Mishkan was created in the week, and the Bnei Yisrael were instructed, we're coming up to it in a few weeks now, the Bnei Yisrael were instructed to build the Mishkan, but guard Shabbos. Build the Mishkan, guard Shabbos. The reference of this juxtaposition, the connection of build the Mishkan, guard Shabbos, informs us that building the Mishkan takes place in any manner that doesn't break Shabbos. In other words, don't build the Mishkan on Shabbos. Build the Mishkan, but remember to guard Shabbos, means build the Mishkan and don't build on Shabbos. So what do we learn from that? That all the actions necessary to build the Mishkan are things that can't be done on Shabbos. Otherwise, you could have built the Mishkan on Shabbos. If building the Mishkan was just wiping the table, you could have done it on Shabbos. Rather, it has to be building the Mishkan can't be done on Shabbos because the things that involve building the Mishkan can't be done on Shabbos. So creative, meaning ma'aseh bereishis, like HaKadosh Baruch Hu created, it's a kind of intellectual, intelligent activity, intelligent process. And it's also creative in the sense that building purposes, which of course building is constructive, it's purposeful. So from there we understand that basically that all malachas have to be done in a creative, constructive manner. And when a malacha is not done with an intelligent, creative manner, it's not considered a malacha. It might be drabanan, it won't be doraisa. So the example we gave last time, with the concept we spoke about, because there's multiple ways, there's multiple directions that it spreads off into. But what we spoke about last time was doing action A, and action A is a permitted action. It's not a malacha. It's not one of the 39 malachas. And action A causes a malacha to happen, or may cause a malacha to happen.
At what time do you have your reflection? From which time on do you have reflection?
What do you mean reflection?
5 years,
oh,
2 years.
Reflection of
what you're saying. That did you reflect about the malacha that you can do in Shabbos?
Yeah.
5 years.
Oh, you mean what age does
because otherwise, is anybody allowed to do that? Is anybody capable of doing this?
So there's two with regard to children. There's 2 or 3 dimensions in halacha of children on Shabbos. One of them is, of course, the regular dimension of chinuch, which means that the parents, not the children, the parents are responsible to educate their children, to train them into doing the mitzvahs. Now, training is a very, very loose concept because training could be intellectual training. It could equally be just an artificial robotic training. That's also training. If you train someone to, for argument's sake, to read, you may train him to read words that he doesn't yet know what they mean. And as you train, that's part one. Part two, when it comes to children, is something called shvisos alecha, which is again a unique aspect in Hilchos Shabbos that doesn't apply elsewhere. Shvisos alecha means that the Torah tells us, look, shvitatan alecha, his shvita, his Shabbos. No problem, no, please. No, everyone is welcome, and Dr. Baruch, if I say any pronunciation whatever, then with pleasure we will repeat over it. So the concept of shvisos alecha, shvitatan alecha, is that the Torah tells us with Shabbos that there's an angle of Shabbos that's lo yisasa melacha, don't do activity, ata, you, or bincha, your child, or bitcha, your daughter, avdecha, your servant, amoscha, your mitzvah, behemtcha, your animal. Now, animals are obviously not responsible in Hilchos Shabbos, but you are responsible that your animal doesn't perform melachas for you on Shabbos, because it's your animal. And that's something that's totally unique in Hilchos Shabbos. It's another novelty in Hilchos Shabbos that we that we don't find elsewhere, which is that the entire process of Shabbos is observed in your property. Children fall into the same problem. The Mishnah, there's a Mishnah in Shabbos that tells us about a child who wants to come and be mechaber a fire. One of the provisions on Shabbos, one of the lochs, is to put out a fire. And so unless the fire poses a risk to life, which nowadays almost always does pose a risk to life, and no one should hesitate. If there is chasshon, a fire in a built-up area, immediately one phones the fire brigade. But in the time of Chazal, the Mishnah was talking about a situation where a person could potentially live in a very isolated place and his barn is on fire and nothing's going to result except loss of damage, loss of property. And the child comes along, the father can't put out the fire because it's a malacha on Shabbos to put out a fire. The child comes along and he puts out the fire on Shabbos. The father has to say, Al techaber, do not extinguish the fire. Why? The Mishnah says, Sheshvitatan alecha, because his Shabbos is on you. He can't perform activities on your behalf, knowing that the father is going to be pleased with the child, not because he is going to get punished in his din v'cheshbon, in his reckoning on his day of judgment, but because you are responsible to make sure that malachas aren't performed by those around you. But the various poskim in halacha talk about what age that starts. So, for example, what if a child is going to, if a 7-8-year-old child, let's say, for example, I'm going to point, we'll go back, he sees that the light is on in his bedroom, and he knows, or the light is on in your bedroom, and he knows that daddy and mummy want the light off. So what does he do? He comes along on Friday night and he tries to turn the light off. So technically speaking, you'd be obligated to tell him, darling, please don't turn the light off. Too bad, don't turn the light off. But what about a very young child who does it, who doesn't have a concept of doing it on behalf of the father? Then the poskim say it's not the same thing. In other words, if a baby comes along or a toddler and flicks the light, you don't need to remove him from it. And then there's another aspect, another element, which is the third dimension, which is called sofinon biyodayim, which is true from even when a baby's born. You cannot feed a baby, you cannot physically give over to a Jewish person, anyone, even a child, something that's forbidden for them. It's called safinon biyodayim. You cannot, safinan biyodayim, you cannot give over with your hands. So that means the halacha says, it's halacha in Shulchan Aruch, that even a child, a baby, you're not allowed to feed them the non-kosher food, even to a baby. Can't feed a baby non-kosher food. The baby certainly is not obligated to his own mitzvahs, and there's not even a concept of chinuch whatsoever. There's no chinuch aspect, but you cannot give with your hand. Where situations in which, of course, babies who need it for for medical reasons, of course. But even without that, there is a situation where a father can put something down, in theory, I'm talking theoretically now, put something down, and the child takes it themselves. Then you haven't handed it over with your hands. We adults are responsible not to hand over with our hands things that are forbidden to children. So equally, we wouldn't be able to hand over any Issa item to a child for no reason whatsoever. But that's a whole. So that's how we reflect. No problem. No. Yeah.
If the mother is breastfeeding, it's okay, but although the milk is not kosher.
It's a fantastic question.
So if the mother doesn't have enough milk, so another woman provides milk, is that okay?
Well, let me first question your original premise. You made a premise there that human milk is not kosher, and I assume that you made the premise human milk is not kosher based on the fact that we don't have split hooves and we don't chew the cud. That's presumed. No, that's the presumption. It would be a very good presumption, and the Gemara comes along to negate that presumption. The Gemara says that you would have had that presumption because the Torah just says, what can you eat? So you can eat animals that have split hooves through the cud, and you can only eat foods that come from animals that have split hooves through the cud. So, for example, cholov, the Gemara says milk of a pig is forbidden like the pig is forbidden. Milk of a cow is permitted like the cow is permitted. The Gemara says you would have made that assumption with humans as well. So there's a miyut in the pasuk. The pasuk, there's a word, I don't remember what, it's more in Samach. The pasuk excludes a certain case, a certain thing, and the exclusion teaches us that human beings, cholov mahalchei shtayim, that's the expression in words, mahalchei shtayim means those who walk on 2 feet. I don't know why the Gemara in this case uses that expression, but cholov mahalchei shtayim, the milk of a human being, is permitted. So all of us are absolutely 100% permitted to drink human milk. And even more than that is, we're even permitted technically, according to the strict, to drink non-Jewish human milk.
monkey?
Well, no, yeah. So that's a Mahalchishtaim. That's what I say. Mahalchishtaim in this case means for sure only humans. The Rishonim say it's just an expression for some reason that the Gemara uses. I'm not sure. But what about not a non-Jewish person's milk? Breast milk from a non-Jewish person also permitted, because it's not the fact that they're Jewish or non-Jewish. The milk of a human being is permitted. However, the Gemara says that once a child no longer needs certain stages, 24 months, 5 years, the Shulchan says, but once a child no longer is above a certain age and no longer drinks breast milk, then to nurse directly from the mother, the Gemara considers it to be called a yoinek sheretz, which means it literally means like as if you suckle from a creature, but it doesn't mean that it means it's semi-repulsive. It has a kind of repulsive connotation. It's not normative. Like a person doesn't feed from a cow, no comparison whatsoever, that just the idea, like one doesn't feed directly from a cow, one doesn't feed directly. Once a child gets a certain age, we no longer, and they stop feeding, and they don't need the milk, and that's after 2, and they've stopped for a month, whatever, etc. They can continue until they're 5, the halacha says, if they want to, but then at that stage, we no longer feed directly from milk. But all human beings, including adults, can drink human milk if it's been already expressed into a container. In other words, as long as it's not drinking directly from the woman, halachically you can drink milk from her. Prepared, expressed. Yeah. So that's it's also about Bosel B'cholov. Yeah. What do we do with Bosel B'cholov?
When the child is eating.
That's also a very interesting, all off the point. Rav S.A Yosef I saw recently I'm sure others do as well. Rav S.A has a very interesting tshuva about it, and because the question is, of course, that let's say I'll take me as an extreme example, because I'm sure the gentleman around the table wait. That's right. Let's say the rest of you eat 1 hour. The rest of you wait 1 hour, presumably between meat and milk. You wait 1 hour. I wait 6. So my children who are going to
let's say half
an hour even. Yeah, but let's take my extreme example. Let's go all the way. My child, my baby. Yeah, or let's say my 2-year-old. He had a bit of. Gave him some meat, some whatever for supper. And then he wants to go to bed and have his bottle of milk. He hasn't waited 6 hours. And I'm giving him the milk in his hand in the case that he hasn't waited 6 hours. But if we said before that the problem of giving is even to a baby, in other words, of course, he hasn't got it. I can't give an Issa. And when I now give the milk, I'm giving over something to drink that is forbidden for him right now to drink, or it would be forbidden for me right now to drink because he's not waited. So that's the question. So Rav S.A Yosef has a very interesting trouble where he basically says that, first of all, there's a machlokes in the Rishonim if there's an issa of safinon biyadayim, of giving over an issa in an issa drabonon. The Mishnah Berurah says there is, the Shulchan Aruch says there is, but there is a machlokes in the Rishonim by an issa drabonon. So at the worst, drinking milk after eating meat, or vice versa, vice versa is not a problem. Anyway, drinking milk after eating meat, at the worst, is only a drabonon. When I say only, it doesn't mean to say it's not a problem. It's just drabonon in the sense that the Torah never forbade you to drink milk after eating meat. Now, Rav S.A goes further, if I'm not mistaken, and he says that this kind of drabonon is even better, because the reason why Chazal told you can't drink milk after eating meat, whatever the time span is not because it's meat and milk together. Because in reality, one's finished. You've eaten one, now you eat the other. And the Torah only forbade you to cook them together, to eat them directly together, to have benefit from them being cooked together, etc. The Torah never forbade you to eat one and then eat the other. The problem is that Chazal understood that there's a certain mental connotation that the experience of having milk within a short time after meat, there's a machlokas. Why? Is it because there's still meat in the teeth? One opinion in Rosh says meat gets stuck between the teeth. Another opinion says that there's reach hapeh, that the sensation, the taste of strong meat or strong is still around, is still resident in the mouth. And as a result, the experience has a relationship. The experience of drinking milk after eating meat has somewhat of a relationship to the experience of eating meat and milk together. Although, of course, like everything of Chazal, the parameters, when they make a concept, they then establish fences that sometimes seem to be further than we would associate, which is really what gives rise to the machlokes in the Rishonim already. That in Holland, for example, which is a legitimate opinion in the Rishonim, there's the minhag is to wait 1 hour. Now I'll tell you that even 1 hour is a chumrah, not a kula, because Rabbeinu Tam in Tosfos says that if it's all about the experience of meat with milk, then so long as you've finished one meal, move the table away, have your milk. And we don't pass them like that Rabbeinu Tam in Halacha, but that's how Rabbeinu Tam takes on. In other words, it's experience. So Bavadi says, if it's about experience, and it's not like a regular Rabbanon, the child doesn't experience nothing because he doesn't have the mental capacity to experience milk after meat. You know, the child is just eating for what he needs to eat, what the mother provides them. So that's another thing he throws into the whatever. And then finally, I think, or more, he probably has loads of other ideas as well. But he also puts into thing that for the child who needs food, where even if it's not life-threatening, but a child does need the regular whatever milks or whatever these products. So he says it's not a problem at all for the child, in theory, to be soimach, to rely on the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam. In other words, as soon as the meal is finished, the child's now ready for the next meal. The child doesn't have ends and beginnings of meals. You give him whatever, and then you move him from the table and put him in his high chair, put him in his cot, in his crib, and he's now on the next meal. So he says, Rabbi says, you're not feeding him something that technically speaking is forbidden, because Rabbeinu Tam would say it's absolutely permitted.
I have a question about mukse.
But the milk that you give to the baby is not milk. I don't know if you use the powder.
Yeah, but the powder has milk.
I can't remember.
No, if you
long time ago, but I remember you take the powder and the water on it.
If a child were to have breast milk after meat,
Okay,
Yeah.
breast milk after meat is itself only breast. In other words, breast. Let's not even say after meat. Breast milk with meat. If someone were to eat meat with breast milk, cook meat with breast milk, it's not an Issa D'Oraisa. Breast milk is not considered milk when a Torah says lo yisfashel gediba chalev imui. So in a breast milk scenario where it comes after meat, you would have a dual drabonon, a double drabonon. You would have the drabonon of, in the first place, milk after meat is only drabonon. You'd have another drabonon that in the first place, even milk with meat would only be drabonon. And then certainly there would be no issue of breast milk. Because the only question would be, that Rav is discussing, is let's say formulas that have real milk powder. Formulas are real milk powder from a cow.
Long time ago.
So breast milk is actually part of
Breast milk is parva, but midrabanon, you're not allowed to have breast milk together with meat.
But for this
Midrabanon.
1 hour,
Because of Marasayim.
for waiting 1 hour, it's the prerequisite. We shouldn't have any part of meat between the teeth, so you should clean the teeth before.
Exactly. In other words, you could clean the teeth, you could do whatever. That's when Chazal. There's a machlokes in Rishonim in which the reason that once Chazal established, they established. So it's true, technically speaking, there is a ramification of what he's saying. There's a practical outcome. Is that the Ran says, what about if after 6 hours you still have food between your teeth?
Yeah.
So then one opinion says it's nothing because it's gone.
But
And
after 1 hour, it's still meat. So you
that's right,
remove
still
the meat
meat,
from the teeth and then start drinking milk.
According to the opinion, according to the opinion that 1 hour, 1 hour is 6. In other words, whatever happens after 6 might happen after 1. I don't know. I think there is maybe perhaps an opinion in Shulchan Aruch brought down in the commentaries that says that you should remove. If you know there's something there, you really can feel just remove it, but you don't need to go looking for it. You don't need to go looking for anything.
I had a question about mukse.
Yes.
You do it on before Shabbos. You think about the hammer, and you know, as an adult that you will use that hammer for a coconut or something.
Right.
That is a child. He is not bar mitzvah, and he sees the hammer. What are you doing as a father?
Als je nou zo loopt, dan is er meer
Afterwards, you use it. Or
When with the hammer to break a coconut,
to make a coconut.
But
That's what you.
you're allowed to
You
use
use it, before Shabbos, I will use that hammer.
Yeah.
Then there's a child who sees the hammer, knows the hammer, one. And what does the father do? Forbidding him, and after it using him, so the child sees 2 things. The father forbids, and afterwards he uses it. There's a question. Is that somewhere mentioned?
He wants to use the hammer to play with.
No.
No, maybe he
No,
wants
no,
to hammer
no,
it, but as a child, he sees all the things.
But yeah, a hammer is technically speaking is not muksa if you want to use it for non-issa activities.
No, but the child will use it for him.
Okay, yeah, if my child's gonna be playing with nails, I'm
My
gonna take
question
it.
is the father forbidding him? And then the child waits right and sees the father using it in the coconut. So he sees 2 things.
And normally the
The
father doesn't.
forbidding and the using.
I know, that's more of a chinuch question, like what the kind of like
Well,
hypocrisy.
Okay.
Okay, I have to think about
But the
it.
child will not use it for
That's it.
hammering nails in the wall or something.
We're gonna get very distracted. We're gonna get right. Let's carry on. We're gonna get very distracted. I haven't even finished the introduction. So we said if a person does activity A, activity A is permitted. Dragging a bench, normally dragging a chair is a permitted activity. It's not a malacha on Shabbos. But the result might be a malacha. In other words, what the Gemara says is he drags the bench on soft, muddy floor outside, and the result is that a groove is created in the mud, and that's what we call dovar she'eino mischavan. It means doing something without intending to have done it. So I did A. A was dragging a bench. Dragging a bench is a totally permitted activity on Shabbos. There's nothing wrong with it. But the result of A is B. B is the groove gets made in the ground, which is a malacha on Shabbos. So Chazal there said, there's a machlokas Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. The halacha follows the lenient opinion. Chazal told us that dovar she'eino mischavan is mutter. That if you do action A and it may result in action B, it's permitted. Action A is a permitted action. Why? Because it was unintentional to do B. And based on what we said before, Shabbos, the malachas of Shabbos are conditional upon being creative, intelligent, conscious, thoughtful. Meleches machsheves, Chazal referred to it. And therefore, dragging a bench, which in itself, no problem, dragging a bench, which in itself is a permitted activity, as long as it's not intentional and it's not inevitable, which we'll talk about next, as long as it's not inevitable that it will result in a malacha, it's permitted. It's fine. What if it's inevitable? In other words, if you drag a heavy bench on very soft ground, which is inevitable that the bench will create a groove. Inevitable, understand the word? Yeah?
Yeah.
Inevitable. So what if you do that? Then the halacha says that is what we call pesik reisha. Pesik reisha, we said, means cutting off the head. It's a borrowed expression. It's a moshel, a mashal. The idea is, like when you cut off the head of a chicken or a head of an animal, it is inevitable that it will die, which is a crude example. It's inevitable it will die. So too, doing an activity that is inevitable that it will result in a malacha is forbidden because it's as if you did the malacha itself. You can't cut the head off a chicken and say, well, I just wanted to play with its head, which is what Rashi, how he explains the example. Says, I just cut off the head to play with the head. I wanted a ping pong ball. Yeah, and you say, but I didn't intend for it to die. It's inevitable. It's part and parcel of cutting off the head of a chicken is that the chicken will die, that the activity of death will occur. Part and parcel of dragging a heavy bench on soft floor is that a groove will be dug, and therefore it's forbidden. It's what we call pesik reisha, which we said means whatever. So that we spoke about this. That was the basic introduction. Others to compartmentalize, to differentiate between an activity where activity A is permitted and it may result in a malacha, but not definitely result in a malacha. That's permitted, or even permitted midrabanan, totally permitted, or where activity A will inevitably result in a malacha is forbidden, and not just forbidden by Torah law. The Rishonim say pesik reisha is also minat Torah. So that was the first thing we established last time. The next thing we established last time was the case of pesik reisha deloi nichale. We said, what happens if a person does, again, activity A, which is permitted, action A is permitted, the inevitable result is some malacha, but he doesn't want the inevitable result. He doesn't want it. So you could go back in theory to the case of dragging the bench on the ground. If I have a beautiful garden that has nice grass and everything is very nicely done, and I drag a heavy bench along the ground, or someone comes along, if I see someone dragging a heavy bench through the soft mud of my wet mud that's just after the rain, and it's nice garden with flowers growing, and he's dragging a bench through the mud, I'm going to run out the house maybe with the aforementioned hammer in my hand, which is a permissible use of a hammer on Shabbos, is to scare off people. And I'm going to run out the house with the hammer. I'm going to tell him, get off my lawn, you're destroying my property. So such an activity would be a pesik reisha deloi nichale. Deloi nichale means which is not wanted, because I don't want a groove in my garden when the garden looks nice. I might want the groove in the garden when it's time to put seeds in the ground, but I don't want a groove in the garden when the garden is already nice and grass and flowers growing, and then someone comes along and makes a groove. So in such a case, you would have the same thing. Action A, dragging a bench. Dragging a bench is not a forbidden action. Inevitably, because the bench is heavy and the ground is soft, inevitably, it will result in a groove. But the groove is not desired. That's defined by psik reisha, which we said is an inevitable action, deloi nichale, which is not wanted. The halacha of a psik reisha deloi nichale is a machloikas. It's actually a machloikas in the Rishonim between the Ri, one of the Balei HaTosfos, the Ri, and the Oruch. The Oruch says, if I'm not mistaken, get it right way around. The Oruch says that psik reisha deloi nichale is mutter. That means that any time a person does action A, and there's an inevitable result that it will be a malacha. Inevitably, it will vadai certainly happen, but I don't want that malacha. It's permitted. The achronim extend it, not just extend it, but they express it even in an even wider terminology that they say not only if you don't want it, but even lo ikpasle, which means if you don't care about it, it has no meaning to you, it has no relevance. It has no significance. It's not desired. It's not, in other words, it doesn't need to be a negative action. The case I gave to you before was a negative desire. I don't want someone to make a groove through the ground of my nice garden. But you could equally have a psik reisha deloi nichale, which is not a negative that I don't want it, I don't care. It doesn't benefit me whatsoever. And in such a case, the Chachamim say it's also permitted according to the Oruch. The Oruch says it's permitted as well. Both options are permitted. Both dragging a bench, doing an action A, which will inevitably result in B, but will not be wanted. The B will not be, the malacha won't be wanted, the outcome isn't wanted, or doing it where the outcome is just not beneficial in any way, it doesn't gain me in any way whatsoever. In both cases, the Oruch says it's permitted.
And if it is beneficial?
No, beneficial is the regular psik reisha. From that, because we've now defined that we've now sort of compartmentalized, and we've said that psik reisha deloi nichale is mutter, then the only psik reisha that we said is osa, not just osa, but min Torah, is nichale. Is any psik reisha which is wanted. A psik reisha that's wanted, where I do action A is permitted. It results in a malacha, and the malacha is desired, then that would be what the Torah considers to be a psik reisha, and that's forbidden.
Planting the seeds.
For planting the seed,
Okay.
or in.
Another question. You were mentioning before your dog, your animals shouldn't do any work for you. In case you have a guard dog guarding your house, it barks when somebody comes. It has its dog house and it knows its function. If the dog comes inside the house, it knows it has to be silent because you don't want to be disturbed by the dog. So on the Shabbat, do you take the dog inside the house or will it stay with the dog?
But what's the problem with the dog being
Because
loud
if
or
the
quiet?
dog barking when somebody invades your property, if you're living on a farm, it's warning you, so it's actually working.
But it's a very fair point, but you have to remember always that malacha on Shabbos is 39 categories of malacha, and everything else is permitted. And we have, and we do it the whole time. We talk about malachas as work. We do this because it's the best translation. It's the translation that's thrown us, because in reality it's not work. You can in other words the
But you can not voorstellen, if you take a monkey, let's say, who, as I say, who makes music on kind of music.
If he makes music, is he making music again? There's a difference between
when he sees something.
Let me ask you even a further question. Is your cow, you own a cow, your cow needs to eat. When he eats, he uproots grass. Uprooting grass is 100% a malacha. There's no doubt. We've got on it. Okay. So can your cow eat grass on Shabbos? The answer is yes. And it's a medrash, it's a mafurish, a mechilta. Rashi brings it somewhere in the Torah. It says, "Leman yonuach shorcha b'chamircha." The Torah says, in order that your ox and your donkey or azel should rest. Yeah, and says the medrash, I might have thought, this is the derech of Chazal, I might have thought that you have to tell your animal he can't even eat grass. Talmud Loima, the Torah tells us, Leman yonuach, in order that it should rest. Ve'ein zeh menucha el tzar. In other words, what the medrash is establishing is, first of all, there's two things. It does it for itself, because it's not doing it. Shvisos nalech means that you have to ensure it doesn't act on your behalf as an agent, even though normally there's no concept of shlichut, of agency to an unintelligible creature. There is no action of agency.
Maybe you have to cut the grass before Shabbos for the cow.
For the cow, cut grass. Yeah, you might have thought you would have to cut the grass before Shabbos. Yeah.
if I open a tin of fish, I could use it to throw away garbage and then throw away the can, but on Shabbos that's not allowed to, so I have to throw the can away right away. If I'm opening a can for canned food, I can use the can to put in garbage.
You're creating
something.
Yeah, creating clear.
So if I throw it away right away, I don't create because I don't have the intention to create the clean. But if I keep it, then I might use it for other things that are not.
So I understand what you're saying. What's the what I'm missing the how what are you comparing? What are you
like? You don't have to cut the grass because you're allowed to eat, and you can open a can if you have to eat.
I understand. I don't understand. I didn't understand where the connection was. Very, very good. But you can't do malachas in order to eat. You yourself can't do malacha in order to eat. You can't cook, right? That's in order to eat. Yeah. You can't cut the grass. Pull a fruit off the tree. Cutting the grass is a bad example because you don't eat grass, but I hope not. But you can't pull a ripe fruit off a tree to eat on Shabbos. You're not allowed to do any malachas in order to eat if it's a malacha. The reason that the example you've given is I can't disagree with you out of respect for you and out of respect for the Chazon Ish who said what you just said. But it's not straightforward in the first place that you're creating kli when you open up the food. First of all, the Siman Shin Yud Daled and Shulchan Aruch, and the Chazon Ish knows this, of course, so this is nothing to do with the Chazon Ish, but the first words of Siman Shin Yud Daled, and Siman Shin Yud Daled is the entire Siman is talking about creating kalim on Shabbos. And it starts off with the following four words: Ein binin ustira b'kalim. There is no building and demolishing with utensils. In other words, when they told us you can't build, they were talking about land-based structures like a house. And then even building, when you say building a house, we don't just mean putting a brick down. The Gemara says that if you get a nail and you hammer it into the wall on Shabbos, you've done a malacha d'oraisa of building. You've added on something that will be a permanent fixture to a structure, to a land-based structure. That's called building. But with kalim, with utensils, there's no binyan ustira b'kalim. So the first thing to understand is that it's not in the first place unsure that this would constitute a malacha in the first place. The Chazon Ish was concerned that whilst the food, the keli, and when I say concern, the Chazon Ish is brilliant, and the Chazon Ish has long pages of writing about it with tiny letters where you have to sort of read between the lines to understand even what he's trying to get at. But the Chazon Ish was concerned not so much about the opening, because the opening isn't doing anything, because in reality, this tuna tin is already created. It's a keli that was created. It serves its purpose. How do I know it's a serve? Because it's decently holding the tuna inside. If there was a leak, it wouldn't be serving its purpose. It served its purpose all the way from the factory to the store to your house. When you open it, you're not doing anything. You're not creating a new keli, because you're actually demolishing something else, which isn't such a problem. You're demolishing the original keli. That's fine. The problem is then, the Chazon Ish says, when you now assign a new function to the keli, you've assigned a new function, which is you want to store. He spoke about storing nails, actually. Like they used to use tins to store their nails and to store eggs, he said. They used to put their eggs in tins, apparently, in the 30s or the 40s, whenever he wrote it, or the 50s. I don't know when he wrote that piece. But when you then assign a new function to the keli, then you may have created a new keli out of a broken one. As it was broken, it finished its original purpose, and you create a new one. So that's
a drink baker from that. When I make it into use of a nap.
A reusable item.
Yeah.
You've now made it a reusable item.
Yeah.
And that the Chazon Ish says is the problem.
Yeah.
That's the problem. It's not, by the way, it's not unilateral in the poskim that you can't whatever. Some poskim are of the opinion that in the first place it was a keli, it stayed a keli. A keli, generally the conditions of a keli is something that can receive, it's bet kibul, it can contain, and on the basis that this tuna can could contain, you just open the lid and it can continue to contain. It was never demolished as being a keli, and therefore it was made long before Shabbos in a factory, and now it just continues to serve its function. And you're allowed to use it, like I can take this cup, finish off the coffee and use it again. I can equally use the tin of tuna again. But then that was a discussion between the Chazon Ish and other opinions. Generally with tins, it's not so relevant today because we're so Dan Rao is so wealthy is, I wasn't looking for the word wealthy, but we're so materialistic. We have so much that we don't have the need to recycle tins. You could, but people are left.
You can use it for storing garbage.
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
And when it's a tin like this, like a gurkenpot,
Yeah, on the huge ones. Yeah. Probably in industrial catering and things, they might use it for something else.
Yeah, or could use it for collecting the peels on the table and then go the whole thing in the garbage bin.
Yeah, that's your example. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure if according to the Chazon Ish that would be forbidden, even according to the Chazon Ish.
Yeah.
Because I think that you're not really using it as, and I'm not sure. I don't want to say what the Chazon Ish would or wouldn't.
Make a hole in the opposite side. So that's what,
Yeah, maybe.
then it's not a bit difficult.
Yeah.
It's very hard for me to, in all honesty, I tell you, Doctor, I'll tell you that in all honesty, it's difficult for me to discuss this Chazon Ish because when I learned through Siman Shin Yod Daled, the specific Siman in Shulchan Aruch, and I came across the Chazon Ish, I found it very difficult to understand it. Not so much because I have brilliant questions on the Chazon Ish, but because it's difficult to see the connection between the sugyas that he brings and the halach. In other words, he navigates his own course through the halacha and he comes up with this psak which has lots of ramifications. And I personally didn't understand it personally, not because I had brilliant questions, but just it didn't seem to fit with how I understood it. But the Chazon Ish definitely understood the sugya better than me. So I don't know what the Chazon Ish did or didn't mean or what he would or wouldn't have said. That's what the Chazon Ish says. So I can't really. In Bnei Brak.
Yeah, so you could read that. Then,
Yeah. I mean, it's not our obligation to understand everyone and everything. And sometimes a person has to read something and he gives it. Hello.
Ja, ik krijg alleen nog blij altijd als je binnenkomt, maar goed. Ja, ik was te laat.
Where are we up to? Okay, so how
Yeah,
we're gonna have to
you have time.
we have to have part 3 and part 4. All right, let's carry on. Yeah, let's carry on. So getting back to particularly Hilchos Shabbos is very fascinating, but we need to stay on course. I apologize, it's my fault. But
doesn't matter. What? Oh, I'm sister.
The Aruch said, now Sikreisha Tloinichale is mutter. The Re says Sikreisha Tloinichale is osa, midrabanon. So that means as follows: Sikreisha, that's nichale, doing action A inevitably causes action B. Action B is malacha. Malacha is wanted, doiraisa, forbidden by Torah law. Lo nichale, if it's not wanted or not, you don't care about it, it's either osa midrabanon according to the Re Balatosas, or it's mutter according to the Aruch. That's the 3 stages of Sikreisha. Now, the Shulchan Aruch, a very interesting piece of Shulchan Aruch that we're trying to extrapolate what the halacha is from the Shulchan Aruch, and it's very unclear. What the Shulchan Aruch is talking about is a case. I think I did mention it briefly last time, but we're talking about a case which is called Masachraya de Nazyosa, de Nazaisa de Nazyosa. I don't know how to pronounce it, mate.
What you said?
Masachraya de Nazyasa. It doesn't help in Portuguese. It doesn't help in my language either. I don't know. But whoever has vowelized the Sfaria Gemara writes Masocharia de Naziata. Yeah, it's on the 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Gemara Ksubas Taf Vav and Aleph. Gimel Mem Ksubas Vav and Valley says Homer B'Shim B'Chizim Shrein of High Derav High Masocharia de Naziata.
Okay.
Yeah. So
okay.
They're saying it might be real.
I see.
It might be Portuguese. I don't know. No, it's not. So this Masocharia de Naziata is a barrel. What we have is a barrel. The barrel is a barrel of wine. I think we did mention it briefly last time. It doesn't matter. We'll say it again. The barrel, you have a big barrel of wine. And in the olden days, they had, instead of having the tap, like we have on our beer bottles, whatever, not beer bottles, the big, it's just spout there. Yeah, the Shabbos kettle, good example, exactly. They was a hole in the barrel before they put the liquid in. They would drill a hole in the barrel. They would then get a piece of wood, like a cork, or cork, or even wood, whatever, and they would stick it into the thing. Now, if you have a cork, the reason why cork is used with bottles is because it's a spongy material, cork, It acts as it's got an expansion property, and which makes it very useful to put into a liquid thing, because the liquid will seep into the cork and expand it, and it would seal it tight. But the Gemara was talking about obviously using wood or not cork, because the Gemara, in the Gemara, they had an issue. Basically is, so you'd shove this piece of wood into the hole, you then fill it up with wine or whatever, and the wine would seep out because the wood wasn't a perfect fit for the hole, because it's almost impossible to make it a perfect fit. So the wine would seep out from the groove around where the wood is. It would leak out. So what they did was they thought of a sealant, like we call it a sealant, like a rubber sealant, what we have today on pipes and taps and whatever. They had a similar thing. They got a piece of material, a cloth, yeah. They wet the cloth, or it was wet already, whatever, and then they put it around the wood and they shoved it into the hole. And then the wet cloth would act as a sealant around the piece of wood. That was what they did. So the cloth got wet from the wine in the barrel. And the Gemara says that because the cloth is soaked with wine, when you shove the cloth into the barrel, the result is that the wine that's in the cloth gets squeezed out so that it's a perfect fit of the wood in the barrel inside the hole. The wine gets squeezed out. Squeezing wine out of a cloth is forbidden on Shabbos. We don't know which one it is. Tosfos discusses which one it is. Is it malaban? Is it laundering? Is it an act of cleaning something, which is one malacha? Or is it an act of mafarik? Mafarik is talking about feeding, milking. Mafarik means extracting something from something else. Not boira, not separating, but extracting. Extracting is the malacha of dosh. Dosh is threshing in English. In other words, what dosh is that they had chran. Chran, is that the word in Dutch?
Yeah.
Chran. And the shell around the chran, they would crush the chran, they would smash it. Yeah, and it would
Dorsen,
and it would break off the shell from the chran. That's called threshing. Chazal took threshing. They said that the av of threshing is with grain. The tolda, the byproduct, which is equally forbidden min Torah, is mafarik. Mafarik is, let's say, extracting a liquid that is contained within a solid. It's the same concept, it's extracting. So
like a sponge.
Like a sponge, exactly, like a sponge. Or the example that Chazal, they spoke about sponges. Their sponges were different to our sponges.
I have sponges for Shabbos.
Yeah, our sponges. Now, 1 second. Our sponges are a totally different thing. Our sponges are
special
sponge. Our sponges are synthetic. Even the real sponges that we use in a week are synthetic, man-made sponges that are actually plasticated. They're made of a kind of plastic nylon material, and they don't actually absorb water. They trap water. There seems to be a difference between Rav S.A established, he didn't establish it, but there's a difference between the Gemara talks about things that trap water and things that absorb water. Cloth, trap. Vasthouden and absorb, which is a similar thing, because in reality always absorbed. Yeah. So, but anyway, the sponge that they had in the time of the Gemara, the Shulchan Aruch talks about sponge. The Gemara talks about sponge, sfoig. It's a Mishnah in Shabbos. A sfoig, you can't use a sponge. And the Gemara, the Aruch, the same Aruch who I told you last time wrote a dictionary. The Aruch wrote a Talmudic dictionary. One of the Rishonim wrote a dictionary on the Talmud. The Aruch says that a sfoig, a sponge, is something that comes from the head of a whale. Yeah, how does that fit with any science people here? Inside the head of a whale was a waxy, spongy kind of. I assume in the bulb, a whale has a bulb. I don't know for sure if this is what Aruch meant. I've tried to work on it before, but a whale has a bulbous kind of. Some marine mammals have a bulbous piece of flesh. And inside that thing is a kind of soft, spongy material that they would kill whales, and they would use these sponges as an absorbent material in their home. That's what Aruch says. Aruch says it's something that comes from a big creature that lives in the sea, from the roish, the head of a dag godel that lives in the sea. I think it's talking about some kind of soft tissue that was in the head of a whale. I think whales do have some kind of waxy something. No, they do. They don't. Maybe not.
Camel?
Yeah, you didn't. Doctor, they never, when they came, no whales ever came. No. Yeah, but that's a sponge, and that's a sponge. But yeah, sponges are squeezing a sponge would be an act of mafarik, but a different example of mafarik, not better, worse, but different example is squeezing an olive or squeezing a grape. Chazal said that squeezing olives from grape for the juice is mafarik, is squeezing. And what's it got to do with us? So squeezing a cloth to extract the liquid could be an act of laundering, of malaban. It could be an act of mafarik. Either way, it's a machlokas which one it is, when, what, how, but whatever it is, it's forbidden. Now, he goes and squashes this piece into the barrel. He squashes it in with the cloth. He is mafarik. It's a psik reisha. It's inevitable that he will extract the wine that's contained in the cloth, right? So we've got exactly the same as we said until now. We've got action A, which is a permitted action, which is the action of sticking something into, putting something into a hole in a barrel, a wood into wood, no problem whatsoever. That is not an action that's forbidden. For those of you who are interested in binyan bekalim and building in a keli, then what happened to building? You're adding something onto a keli. So the answer to that is that this is made to go in and out. In other words, once you've designated this piece of wood as a piece of wood that will be removed, put in, removed, put in, removed, put in, there's no problem whatsoever. That's the concept of binyan bekalim. For that reason, you're allowed to open and close a bottle top on Shabbos. I'm not talking about the first time, which is a discussion, but afterwards you can remove and unscrew a cap of Coca-Cola because it's designed to do that. Even though technically speaking, the action of screwing something onto a keli could, in theory, be a malacha d'oraisa, but because it's been designed for that, it's fine. Open, close, like opening and closing a door. But here in this case, it's been that, like we said, the wood has been designed, and therefore sticking the wood in is a permitted action. The cloth around the wood is soaked with wine. The wine will squeeze out. That's an inevitability that A will result in B, which is a malacha. Therefore, it's a psik reisha. Now, is it nichle or is it loy nichle? Is it wanted or is it not wanted? So the Rishonim said that in the case where this hole, for some reason, is at the top of the barrel, as you then scoop out whatever, wherever it should be at the top, then the wine will flow into the barrel, then it's wanted because you benefit that the excess wine that was trapped in the cloth goes back into the barrel. It's beneficial. So it's a psik reisha to nichale. But what about the case where squeezing it, the wine will just sort of drip back out, it's at the side, or just drip back out onto the table, onto the floor? That's psik reisha to loy nichale. That's a classic example of psik reisha to loy nichale. It's there that the Aruch says permit it, fine, good. And the Rebbe says also midrabon, it's forbidden by rabbinical law. The Shulchan Aruch, when he deals with this case, he brings both opinions. And what he does is he says, and this is fascinating, he says, it's the last, the world, the community were lenient with this matter. Now it looks like he's saying that the minhag ha'olam was to take on that psik reisha deloi nichale is mutter, because it says everyone's lenient. In other words, he doesn't, when he says the olam noyagim, he doesn't mean people who don't know Hilchas Shabbos. He means people who know Hilchas Shabbos. That ideally the halacha should be that psik reisha is also like the re. He starts with the re. The world are lenient, and then he says, and this is fascinating. He says, "V'yesh l'lamed aleim zchus." One can learn, one can teach a zchus. That means one can give them the benefit of the doubt. So he gives a reason why you can give them the benefit of the doubt, which we're not going to have time to discuss now. Nader will come back to it another time, if I'm ever invited back.
Yes, I'm sure.
But he says we're going to take us about maybe several years to get through the sheet, but it doesn't matter. It's all fun. So the world are lenient. The minhag ha'olam was to be lenient, but the Shulchan Aruch was not comfortable with it. And he wasn't comfortable with assuming that the reason why they were lenient is because they followed the Aruch. And that's unusual. Normally, you'd say, listen, you've got a machlokas, it's a machlokas in a drabonon between the Ri, who says also midrabonon, and the Aruch, who says mutter. He would say, I personally, the Mechaber of Shulchan Aruch said, I personally feel the halach is like the Ri. But the other poskim, the other authorities disagree with me. The world are lenient, their rabbis are lenient, and they pass like the Aruch. Okay, that's what it is. In this case, that's not what he says. He says the world are lenient, and there's a limud zechus. That means you can give them the benefit of the doubt for an external reason in this particular case, which, as I said, we'll talk later next time about it. I'm going to make a whatever. I'll have to make a mark. I have to remind myself. But a different external reason that's only relevant to this particular case. Why does he do that? Because the Mechaber is of the opinion that the position of the Aruch is a das yichidah, is a very lone opinion, is a single opinion, and that all the other Rishonim agreed with the Ri. That the Mechaber doesn't establish it in Shulchan Aruch, he establishes it in Beis Yosef. He establishes that most of the Rishonim don't hold like the Aruch. Therefore, from a perspective of halacha, we follow the majority, and therefore it's forbidden. However, he says, I have to deal with the fact that I see people doing this action of sticking the thing into the barrel. So he says, I have another way out in this particular case, why they can stick the piece of wood with the cloth into the barrel. That not just is it because of sikreish, but another thing, which he says, consider the handle of a sponge. He has a whole mechanism about it, which comes back to sponges. But in other words, it's an external reason, external factor. Well, he does that because, in essence, the Shulchan Aruch is not comfortable with the position of the Aruch and the Halacha, which the poskim say indicates that we don't follow. And then he finishes off even, he says, therefore, Toiv Lahan Higom, they shouldn't do anything. It's a complex piece of Shulchan Aruch because he sort of goes like a bit of a ping pong backwards and forwards. But the Achronim, Magen Avraham, the Taz and Shabura, the Sfadi Achronim as well, I think they take on the Aruch HaShulchan that Ikka Halacha is like the Ri, that Psikreish Lo Nichle is Osa, is forbidden. But in the case where there's multiple factors to consider, then you can, we said when we mentioned this last time, you can be mitzaref, that means you can join the shitta of the Aruch, the opinion that says it's mutter, together with other factors and create a heter. And that's something that we see often in halacha, is where we say, well, listen, we have, what's the case? It's Psikreish Lo Nichle, there's the Aruch. The Aruch on its own isn't good enough. That's what Mechaber says, not good enough. But in this case, you might have another tzorach, an external reason, a loss of money, etc., etc., etc. And you could start to begin to combine, the role of the Aruch would be to combine the various factors together. But in and of itself, Psikreish Lo Nichle, the final word of the Shulchan Aruch is that Psikreish Lo Nichle is forbidden, midrabanan. And we'll carry on, Bez Hashem, next time.
Okay, thank you, Skoich. Thank you very much. After Pesach.
Yes, after Pesach.
Yes.
You're very well working well in advance.
If somebody from the Rhein wants or allowed, okay.